Hi, everybody. So I am here with Calin Popovici from PC Legal. And today he's going to talk to us about what's on everybody's mind in the real estate world right now, COVID-19 and the real estate transaction, and how does that impact everyone? We hear words like force majeure. We hear things about getting retribution, not closing a transaction. Buyers don't want to close, sellers don't want to close. It's nightmares and it's also not nightmares, but let's talk about the nightmares. So thank you so much for being with us.
Hi, Carly. Thanks so much for having me.
Great. So the first question that everybody asks is, when we talk about COVID-19, it's being put under this kind of umbrella of force majeure or what's the English version of force majeure?
So the English equivalent of force majeure is superior force.
Okay. So force majeure, superior force, what is it? And is COVID-19 considered force majeure?
Okay, so before giving you the definition of superior force or force majeure as it stems from the Civil Code of Quebec, also known as the CCQ for short, as you're well aware, brokerage contracts in Quebec do not have any force majeure or superior force clauses. In regular contracts, these clauses are actually key, and we always encourage our clients to have us insert them into the contract, given that they will stipulate first of all what would be actually a force majeure, what would fall under that in that category, as well as what would the subsequent recourses of the parties to the contract be. Having said that, and given the fact that Quebec brokerage contracts do not have these clauses, we have to fall back on the Civil Code of Quebec. There's three main components to superior force. So the event has to be unforeseeable. The
Which this
event
was.
Absolutely. The event has to be irresistible, and it has to be external to the party that's subject to the obligation. So to
Right.
quickly go over these, unforeseeable, an event is deemed to be unforeseeable when the parties to the contract could not foresee it at the time that the contract was concluded.
Right.
Obviously, the standard example that a lot of people use, the ice storm of 1998, when despite the fact that we had previously had ice storms in Quebec, given the magnitude of the ice storm of 1998, more often than not, it was deemed to constitute superior force. The second component is that the event has to be irresistible. So an event is irresistible when, firstly, any person placed under the same circumstances cannot reasonably avoid it. And secondly, when it makes the performance of an obligation impossible.
Okay. So
So
right there, Kaylin, I'm going to say, for example, if notaries in Quebec would have been deemed non-essential and would have shut down 100%, and they would not be able to perform their obligation because the government would say they were not allowed, that would be irresistible. That black and white, notaries can't notarize, so therefore you can't do anything because only a notary can close in Quebec. So nor buyer nor seller can move forward without the notary, and notaries aren't deemed as to be non-working.
that is 100% correct. So given that, as per Quebec law, any selling or buying of an immovable, so a house, for example, requires a notarial act. In such a situation, whereas the notaries would be banned from working or would be unable to work, given that they would be qualified as a non-essential service, then you would indeed have a situation where both parties could probably have a valid claim based on superior force, and basically exclude both of them from going forward with the sale. Nevertheless, as we always encourage our clients, there could always be an amicable solution that can be found.
Right.
So, in a situation where both the buyers and the sellers are kind of in the same boat, the buyers want to buy that property, the sellers are okay with the price and all the conditions, so on and so forth. If both of them can kind of hang on to their current dwellings, it would be a very positive thing for both parties to come to an understanding and say, hey guys, listen, we want to buy your place, and the other party saying, well, we want to sell to you. Let's wait it out a month, 2 months, 3 months, whatever time it takes for the notaries to come back.
Right. As we all know, that's not the case. Notaries have been deemed an essential service, and it's discretionary to them. So, not to discuss that because obviously you fall under a different jurisdiction than they do. But in this case, it's no longer black and white because notaries have been told that they can be an essential they can be an essential service, and they can move forward. So, if you have to check the 3 boxes right now, box 2 is not black and white; it's in a zone of gray.
Correct. So in the present case, where notaries can either have the parties come in individually, so not at the same time, or do it through a video conference. Obviously, step number 2 is debatable.
Okay.
Of course, some people will try to use the entire concept of superior force, because to back out of the deal. I'm giving a basic example. Someone someone made a promise to purchase to buy a property. They foresee that in the next few months, the real estate market might go down. Obviously, you're an expert in that field, but nonetheless, if that's what they feel that will happen, they will try to back out of it, because at the end of the day, who wants to pay more for a property that they can get for considerably less amount, maybe even a couple months down the road.
Right. And as you can attest to more than anybody, we can't speculate on what buyers and sellers are thinking. They are kind of in control of their own dialogue, and people make decisions based on their own choices, whether they're right, wrong, legal, illegal. That'll be up to the courts in the future. So what's number 3?
Correct. So number 3 is the event in question has to be considered exterior, meaning that the debtor, the party that has to fulfill their obligation, did not in any way contribute to the event. That was basically out of their control. So what people need to remember is that the debtor will always have to be able to demonstrate that it has still taken all the necessary and reasonable steps to mitigate the consequences. So having said that, when you look at the 3 components of superior force, obviously they all have to be present. But what's most important, and we can't stress this enough to clients, it's just because superior force was applicable to client A does not mean that it will be or it could be applicable to client B or C or D or any other client, right? Because every case is different. The facts of the case are different, and as such, it's not an overall. It's not like a joker that kind of you can kind of pull it out of your back pocket and kind of forego your legal obligations. Because at the end of the day, a brokerage contract, just like any other contract, it's a bilateral contract, meaning between 2 parties, and when you do sign it, it is a binding contract, and superior force is obviously a way to get out of it. But like I said, it's on a case-by-case basis.
Well, exactly. There's no, as you mentioned to me several times, there's no precedent for this. So you really are playing a game of Russian roulette. And if there's a way to solve this amicably or to delay the transaction, find something that works for both parties, that is your first call of action, because there is no guarantee, like in anything in life, that if you go through the process of hiring lawyers and going after the person, suing the person for damages, et cetera, that you will actually win, because there is no prior cases like this. Even though we can say that the ice storm was our last time that we used force majeure in Quebec, is COVID-19 that has to do with health and similar to an ice storm or an environmental, who knows? And it's, what's going to be really interesting is when we speak again in a couple weeks, or when we go back to, the courts open, et cetera, because note, and that's something that we didn't mention that's very important to people to know, is the courts are closed for non-emergencies. So if you do decide to pursue the other party, it's going to be a while. You're going to have to hold tight for a while. And so, all that being said, it'll be really interesting when we talk in a couple of weeks, months, and we go back and we talk about the jurisprudence and the cases that have come about because of this.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you mentioned, the courts are basically right now in standby mode. From it's only emergencies that are urgent cases that are being heard. Um, and as far as having any sort of jurisprudence at the present for real estate transactions based on superior force, or for for any other reason, we don't have any right now. So we will have to wait it out. I'm assuming that there will be quite a few cases that will successively hit the courts, and in a few months down the road, we should have more of an idea as to which way the courts want to go with specifically COVID-19, and whether it does or does not constitute superior force. One little example that I could mention, when we're talking about the three components of superior force, so like the first one, which basically says that it's unforeseeable to the parties when they sign the contract. If for example you have two parties that signed a promise to purchase last week, given that we already are fully aware of COVID-19, we know it's a pandemic, we know what it's doing, we know the rules that the Quebec government has implemented, social distancing and so forth. So obviously, one of the parties, in my opinion, could not use superior force as a way out of the contract, given that it was not unforeseeable. You were smack in it, and you knew what it entailed. You knew that it might be more difficult to have to set up a closing date, but nonetheless, one of the elements of superior force is not there, and as such, in my opinion, you would not be able to use that to back out of the contract.
Well, very similar to what you're speaking about when you accept an offer from someone during this time, and you go in with, the whole point is, as a buyer or a seller, with your eyes open. A similar thing would be for anybody who accepts an offer, who accepted an offer, I would say in and around mid-March to now, from someone who's a foreign buyer. Same thing. If you thought that was, and as a seller, if you accepted an offer from a foreign buyer without doing your due diligence, that foreign buyer was able to come here or was able to mobilize their funds, and now you're claiming force majeure, I assume that it'd be much more difficult than someone who would be in the position that they would have signed a promise to purchase in December, closing for April 1 or May 1. And then, with time you get wiser, is kind of the bottom line. It's, a lot of people are in the position where, and this is where the biggest issue is, not people, I would say, that signed promises to purchase during the investigation or during the time of COVID, but the people who signed them a lot earlier, who have sold promise to purchases January, February, closing, March, April, those people, it was, like you said, one of the three things was very unforeseen at the time of signing it. So it's going to be very interesting, and I look forward to having you back to talk about all the different cases that'll come up, and how people will, the courts will see people's claims, because there's a lot of them, and they're different, and some of them are probably more founded than others.
Absolutely, and I'm looking forward to coming back and speaking with you, whether it's in a few weeks or maybe a couple of months. That being said, I mean, I agree with you. I do think that we will be, as attorneys that that practice in this field, whether it's real estate contracts or just contracts in general, I do foresee like a big influx of lawsuits. Obviously, once the courts open up again. I mean, it's just overall, it's hard for people right now to do any sort of business Obviously, health is the number one concern, and it's still a very big issue. At the same time, most of the businesses are shut down. People, will probably try to find ways to get out of their obligations. Again, if I give you an example where it's a contract where it's a successive contract, right? So let's say it's like a every month, right? It's a monthly contract. The parties could very easily say, look, we're not going to void the contract. We're just going to suspend it. So
Like rent.
right. So again, it's gonna be really interesting to see where everything goes, and I definitely look forward to coming back and discussing with you.
Perfect. And I'm also looking forward to everybody's questions that they're going to post in the next 24 hours. And hopefully we can answer them. I know that it's very hard, and it's free legal advice is not what we're offering. But if people have general questions, we're happy to answer them in the next 24 hours.
Absolutely, we're gonna try to answer as many of them as possible, and see where let's see what the future has in store for us.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Calin.
My pleasure. Thank you, Carly, and stay safe.
Same to you. Stay healthy.
Thanks. Bye bye.